Hello and welcome to Sexy Time. I mean, settings time. Settings aren't sexy, but they can save you a load of time and effort and make your shooting experience a lot better. So I'm gonna take my EOS RP right here, which I've had for about 6 months and I've had some time to get used to the features. And I'm gonna tell you the 10 things that I would do as soon as I took it out of the box if I knew exactly what to do with this camera. Now, before we get started, let me remind you about my podcast. It's called Photobomb. It comes out every week and I co-host it with my good friend Booray Perry. There is a link to that in the description of this video and a link to his excellent YouTube channel. Now what's cool is I've got this set up with my laptop here and I'm recording the screen, so I'll be able to walk you through the settings live. And so it'll be a little more loose, a little more free-form. I may mess up as we go and that's okay, but I've got my notes, I've got my recording, and I've got you guys, and that's all I need. So let's start with the easy one. Okay, let's check out image quality. Now, image quality is the first setting on the camera, and it's also the first thing I go to. Now, this camera has CRAW or CR3 or compressed RAW, which Canon introduced with the M50. All the research I've done on the internet and Wikipedia and YouTube and everything else says that there's really no discernible difference between using that and full-size regular old RAW, and it saves you about 40% of the file size. So I've been shooting on CRAW since I got the camera, and everything is turning out great. So that's thing number one that I do. The next thing that I'm going to do is now this is going to depend on what you like. So the image review is probably the first thing that I shut off, and it really depends on how you shoot. So if you're shooting like action sports and stuff that's fast moving, you may want to shut this off because you will not need to see every image right after you take it. You're just going to shoot a bunch of images and not worry about looking at them. Then turn the image review off. I turn it off because I like to try and concentrate on shooting and working with my subject. And I shoot mostly under pretty controlled conditions, so I don't need to look at the image every time to see if it was exposed correctly. I've already metered everything. I know that it's good. So it kind of takes me out of toying with my camera and into interacting with my client. So I turn the image review off. All this means is that you have to push play to see the image that you took instead of it just popping up onto the camera. And it also could save you some battery life if, you're into that sort of thing. Next, moving on, is I love to get rid of this next feature, which is exposure simulation. Now you can go into exposure simulation and it's got 3 modes, the 2 main being enabled and disabled. Enabled is really good for available light shooting. So when you're looking through the viewfinder or using the LCD, once you depress the shutter to focus, it's going to immediately show you what exposure you're going to get if you push the shutter. So that's actually really cool, and it can keep you from wasting frames and make you a much better, more accurate photographer, and it's a really great tool. But again, since I'm shooting in the studio, I need to see through the viewfinder without the camera telling me what available light exposure I'm gonna get because I'm using strobes. So if you're shooting in the studio and you're using strobes, go ahead and disable that, and then you will just be able to see through the viewfinder to sort of get a sense of your composition and not have to worry about what exposure you're gonna get if you already know because you've metered it and you're using strobes. All right, moving on, I'm gonna work on the autofocus method and the eye detection autofocus. I shoot mostly people, mostly individuals, and this is an amazing feature that makes my life so much easier. So if you have your autofocus method set to tracking, and then you're going to have your eye detection autofocus enabled, that's gonna give you that really excellent Canon eye autofocus. It's gonna save you a lot of time. Now, if you're shooting landscapes or you prefer to work in some other method, go ahead and turn that off, but I do believe by default it's off and you have to enable it. I really love this feature and I use it all the time, and I turn it on as soon as I take a camera out of the box. Now, the next thing you want is to go down to touch and drag AF settings. This is a feature that was introduced, I think, with the Canon M50, and it enables you to use the rear LCD screen as a focus point selector as opposed to having a joystick on the back of the camera. And it's actually pretty slick. So I really like to enable this and then set it the active touch area to the right. That way my thumb, which is on the right-hand side gripping, the left hand under the lens, I can actually move around the back of the LCD and put that focus point whenever I want it. And this is even active during that eye detect mode. So if it's grabbing the wrong face or the wrong eye or the wrong thing or somehow messing up, I can actually just correct it using my thumb. I think it's a great feature, and I like to set it to enabled and active touch area to the right. Moving into it, and I'm just going through the menu kind of in order, the next thing that I'll select is my movie recording size. Now, obviously I make videos. Most of my stuff I record is in 1080p. I don't worry too much about the 4K. Although this camera will do 4K, it is cropped. And a lot of people don't like that. It changes sort of your relationship with your lenses. And so I keep it on FHD 23.98, or essentially 24 frames per second. This is interesting because this version of it, 24 frames, was not in the original RP when it came out, and you have to do a firmware update to get that. So it is a free firmware update, but 24 frames per second, it looks great for videos like the one that I'm doing, and that's what I prefer to use. And since I'm shooting in 1080, I just go ahead and set that up in advance so I don't have to worry about it later. One of the features that Canon added into some of their entry-level cameras in the M series is this mode and feature guide. And so if you're really familiar with your camera, you aren't gonna wanna have this on, although if it's new to you, leave it on for a little while because it can show you some cool stuff. But like if you go to the mode guide, every time you switch from manual to program or to aperture priority, it actually pops up a screen and tells you what that mode is good for and when you should use it. And that's all good information if you need it. But if you don't, you just shut it off right here. And I disable them both because I've had this camera for a while. I'm familiar with most of the features. And I don't want the Microsoft paperclip popping up and telling me how to use my camera. So they go off. Now we're gonna move on to my favorite feature of all time to disable the stupid beep. I'm not sure why this exists. Maybe it's for, situations where you're not quite sure if your camera's focused or whatever, but man, is it annoying. It is such a rookie mistake to be shooting at a wedding or an event or somewhere where you're trying to be inconspicuous and the camera beeps every time it goes into focus. And so I go right over to this and I turn that beep right off. So you might need it in certain situations. I haven't found one where it's useful yet. I know that there's a danger in getting used to the beep to where you don't notice it anymore, but the people around you will, and it can irritate people. So if your job is to kind of fly below the radar as a photographer and not have people notice you, turn that off. Next, we're gonna go into my favorite feature of the newer Canon cameras since they've added wireless and Bluetooth connectivity, are gonna be the wireless communication settings. Now, I could make a whole video dedicated to setting this up, and I'll probably link to one since I haven't made one yet in the description, but I will come back and make one. But that is one thing I do right away. What's cool about the wireless communication settings is you can actually set it up for multiple devices and save those as presets. So the first thing I do is I go in there and I program it for my phone and I program it for my iPad. For my phone, it's great when I'm traveling and walking around with my family, going to Disney World and taking pictures, and I can shoot images right to my phone. I absolutely love it. And when I'm working in the studio, I love to collaborate with clients and show them what we're doing as we're working and get a better monitor to kind of view the images I'm taking when I'm using my iPad Pro. So I set those up right away, and they can be slightly cumbersome to set up in the beginning, but they actually have some new things that actually let you scan it with a QR code and download the Camera Connect app and the other cool stuff. It's a really neat system. It's really useful. But set it up right away and then do your presets so that you don't have to worry about it. Finally, the thing that I set up last and probably the thing that saves me the most time are my favorites menus. If you go all the way to the right, you're gonna see this white star on the green field, and you can see that I've already got mine set up, and these are the things that I like to use the most. And so, most situations, I'm shooting the same thing. I'm shooting individuals in the studio, so I access those same features, but some of them are kind of deep into the menu, and I don't wanna have to go in every time. So you can set up these favorites menus to actually take the things you use the most and put them where you can access them really quickly and you know where they are. And what's even cooler is you could create multiple tabs inside these and even rename those tabs. So you can check that out. If you go to down here to configure, you can actually rename a tab. So let's say, for example, that you shoot portraits in the studio and portraits on location. Let's say that you shoot video, you shoot events or sports or whatever you got going on, weddings. You can create a tab for everything that you shoot with the features that you access the most for that particular thing. For example, if you're shooting a custom white balance a lot in the studio, but not when you shoot a wedding, then you won't need to include that in your weddings menu and you have room to put something else. So don't ever go digging in the bowels of your camera's menu system ever again. Find it once, add it to your favorites menu, and then be done with it. Here are the things that I put on my favorites menu. Image quality, because sometimes I switch to JPEG. If I'm just shooting my kids around the pool or something, I don't really worry too much about the raw processing. I think the Canon JPEGs are pretty good. I shoot those to my phone and I've got them to be able to share with friends and family and do what I need with them. Custom white balance is another thing that I do a lot in the studio, sometimes multiple times within the same session. So I will make sure that I get that right there where I need it on that favorites menu. Now the white balance is part of the custom white balance process, so I do keep that white balance in there. There isn't really a dedicated white balance button on the camera by default, so I just add that to my favorites menu so it's there right when I need it. Now the eye detection autofocus is a really cool thing to put on your favorites menu because if you go from shooting a person in the studio to shooting large groups of people or shooting a landscape or shooting something that doesn't have, eyeballs, then you can turn that off really quick without having to dig through the menu for it. Format card's a no-brainer. We all format cards a lot. Every time I put a card in the camera, I look and make sure that there's nothing on it that I need, and then I format it. And so that's right there in that first favorites menu. And then the wireless communication settings, it's one of the first things I do when I set up and start shooting in the studio is I turn on my wireless communication settings and connect the camera to my iPad. And just a note on that, one of the cool things about it is that it actually streams the images off of the card in its main setting instead of transferring the images and filling up your iPad, and I really like that. So as long as all the wireless stuff is good and there's not too much interference in your area or where you're shooting, it is a pretty fantastic thing to be able to have. That's pretty much it, you guys. That's how I set up my EOS RP. Leave me a comment if you have an idea or something that you do when you set up your camera that you think is really useful. I'd love to hear about it. Like this video so more people see it. Subscribe to the channel for more awesome content. And don't forget to listen to the Photobomb podcast. Again, there's a link to that in the description. It comes out every week, and I think you'll really like it. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video, and I'll see you next time.